I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome to the Vietnam Veterans News Podcast. News of interest about Vietnam veterans from a Vietnam veteran. Now, here's your host, Mac Payne.
This is Mac Payne here with episode 1686 of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. News about the Vietnam War and the brave veterans who served there, as told to you by yours truly, a Vietnam veteran. In this episode, I'm going to bring up a subject that just might bring up breakfast for many Vietnam veterans. That subject is none other than Jane Fonda. I hate to bring that up, but sometimes you have to tell what's going on and things related to the Vietnam War. The vast majority of Vietnam veterans, when you mention that name, most of them will look for a hole somewhere to get sick in. Most Vietnam veterans don't like Jane Fonda, and we know why. She was not only an anti-war protester. That's bad enough. But she took it to the next level. She went over to North Vietnam during the war while Americans were dying in the war in South Vietnam and protested against the war. She even went to visit POWs and dissed them, chewed them out for having the audacity to fight against the peace-loving North Vietnamese. The worst thing she did on that trip was to put on an NVA helmet and sit on an NVA anti-aircraft weapon. Very similar to the ones that were shooting at me down there at the DMZ as I flew Cobra gunships for the 101st Airborne Division. That'll rile you up right there. Due to the fact I like to be fair and balanced on this podcast, I'm going to tell you about an upcoming event scheduled at Kent State University where Jane Fonda is going to be the featured speaker, and they're going to pay her a fee of something like $83,000 just to speak for a few minutes about her time over there in Vietnam. One thing you got to say for the woman, she knows how to promote herself. I guess if you want to make a lot of money on the speaking circuit, next time we're in a war, go over to the other side, make a few speeches, put on one of their uniforms and sit on one of their anti-aircraft guns and have your picture taken. And then forevermore, you can get big speaking fees. Maybe she had that in mind. Maybe she didn't. Don't know. I have not spoken to the lady. Because we're fair and balanced here, I'm going to share with you a story that appeared on the Cleveland.com website that was written by Brian Albrecht, a writer for The Plain Dealer. Jane Fonda's visit to Kent State offensive to some local vets, but there's also grudging acceptance. This story describes the Kent State commemoration ceremonies they're going to hold to mark the 50th anniversary of the killing of students at Kent State during an anti-war demonstration. It's a terrible thing that happened back then. That's why they're having this commemoration, hoping to prevent it from happening again. The story that I'm going to share with you is very interesting in that it presents viewpoints from both sides. There are even veterans cited in this story who agree with Jane Fonda. They're in the minority. But I'd like you to listen to this story and think about it. Both sides bring up some very interesting points that should be considered. So let's do it. Again, title of the story is Jane Fonda's Visit to Kent State Offensive to Some Local Vets, but there's also grudging acceptance. By Brian Albrecht, a writer for The Plain Dealer up there in Cleveland, Ohio, the home of Mr. John D. Rockefeller and Henry Flagler, two of the 12 gentlemen who built Standard Oil Company, right there in Cleveland, Ohio, back in the 1860s and 70s. Enough of that. let's get to this story about Jane Fonda. After you hear it, think about it, and maybe you want to reassess what you think about the lady. I'll tell you up front, it didn't change anything I thought about the lady. But let's take a look anyway and see what you think. Dateline, Cleveland, Ohio. It only took one photo for actress Jane Fonda to go from being a pin-up darling of U.S. troops in Vietnam to Hanoi Jane, the object of hate and derision. The photo showed Fonda, an anti-war activist, during a visit to North Vietnam in 1972. She was pictured sitting on an anti-aircraft gun of the type used to shoot down American aircraft during the war. I can attest to the truth of that line in this story. The photo, Fonda subsequently said, was not posed to send an anti-American message. She was manipulated into sitting at the gun. Oh, yeah. I can believe that. Oh, yes, Jane, I'm sure that's what happened. She has since apologized for the photo, once calling it a 2-minute lapse of sanity that will haunt me forever. But Vietnam vets were outraged, and some are speaking out once again after learning of Fonda's speaking engagement on May the 3rd at Kent State University. Her speech is part of a commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the May 4, 1970 anti-war protest and fatal shootings of 4 students on campus by the Ohio National Guard. The American Legion is going to host celebrations of veterans on the day of Jane Fonda's visit. You can read more about that at cleveland.com. News 2020-03, American Legion hosting Veterans Celebration in Kent on the same day as Jane Fonda visit.htm. In other words, just go to the cleveland.com website and put in American Legion. I'm sure it'll pop right up. Getting on with the story. That link to the American Legion post story will be on the show notes for this episode as soon as I clear up issues I'm having with HostGator surrounding my website. I'm sure we'll get those things squared away soon. Let's get on with the story. Fonda, one of the 3 keynote speakers for the commemoration, the others being historian Eric Foner and scholar, author, and attorney Laurence Tribe, was chosen because of her commitment to reconciliation, one of the themes of the commemoration, and activism, according to the university's May 4 50th Commemoration Advisory Committee. Advisory Committee spokesperson Roseanne Chick Canfora, who witnessed the 1970 shootings that wounded her brother, Alan, said Fonda and the other speakers have something important to teach about the danger of polarization and what we have learned from our mistakes during a very divisive period in American history. Sounds like Chick Canfora could be easily sliding into some current political talk here. Canfora said Fonda has a powerful message about working on the issues that unite rather than divide Americans. While acknowledging the criticism surrounding Fonda's 1972 photo, Canfora said she was a fitting addition to a diverse program, saying, "Just as many people applaud the woman that she is and all she stood for throughout her life. The Hanoi Jane image, as it has been dubbed, is still hurtful and offensive to some area Vietnam veterans. But their opinions can also include a grudging acceptance and even support." Fonda remains a sore subject with David Pritish of Brecksville. He was an Army Green Beret in Vietnam in 1967. He says this, "I don't know of any veteran who was in Vietnam who likes Jane Fonda. I mean, we really don't like her." Amen to that, David. He regarded her trip to North Vietnam as treason, pure and simple. But she was famous, and she had a hot bod, and the movie star, and gets a pass. She tried apologizing once, he said. It was half-hearted. Conversely, Vietnam veteran John Tidyman publisher and editor of the Northeast Ohio veterans publication DD-214 Chronicle, looks kindly on Fonda. The Fairview Park vet respects Fonda's anti-war stance and says this: "I admired her greatly when she did it, and I admire her greatly now. I think she took great chances, especially professionally with her opposition to the war." He continued with the statement, "I've always been surprised at the reaction from other vets who said they were very disappointed, very angry about Fonda. I think that anger should have been directed toward the military command that did not know how to run that war." However, Tiedemann added, "She made some mistakes. She should have never sat on that cannon." I'm a little suspicious about Tiedemann and his time in Vietnam. Most every person in the military in Vietnam who saw that picture would not call what Jane Fonda was sitting on up there in Hanoi a cannon. It was an anti-aircraft gun. So Mr. Tiedemann thinks that Jane Fonda was just a poor innocent pawn of the North Vietnamese. So, was she used by the North Vietnamese? Of course she was. That's what Mr. Tiedemann thinks. Personally, I think Jane Fonda knew exactly what she was doing the whole time she was there. Back to the story. Tiedemann adds this statement, referring to whether or not Jane Fonda was used by the North Vietnamese. He continues, "But so were the GIs sent to Vietnam. The boys who were sent over, many to their deaths, they were really fooled. It's just a sad chapter in our history that half a century later still elicits such hate-filled and violent comment." Some local veterans suggested that Fonda should donate her $83,000 speaking fee to the families of loved ones lost in Iraq, Afghanistan, and particularly Vietnam. Did you get that? They're going to pay Jane Fonda $83,000 to speak at this event at Kent State. Where's the fairness? That's what I'm asking. I like to speak about the Vietnam War, and nobody's offered to pay me $83,000. But that's life, and we all know life is not fair. Continuing with the story. Vietnam vet Ron Coverett of Fairview Park said this, referring to her fee: "Give it to the families that are still mourning. Vietnam may have been 50 years ago, but I know a few families who lost loved ones, and it's still in their hearts." That's right, Ron. When somebody died in Vietnam, their families' lives were changed forevermore. A few dollars from Hanoi Jane Fonda, I'm afraid, won't do much good to ease the pain of their loss. One of the Vietnam servicemen who once had the popular Fonda pinup poster from the 1968 movie Barbarella was Dave Lang of Malvern. Lang, who graduated from Kent State after serving in the Navy, recently recalled, "When I saw that picture of her with the anti-aircraft gun in North Vietnam, that did not make me happy. That's a hard one to get over." But he did. "Most of us made some mistakes when we were younger, and she did apologize for it," Lang said. "She's not one of my favorite people by any means, but she's moved on, and so have I." He did suggest that Kent State involved Vietnam vets in the May 4th commemoration, noting that the protest of that era was generally against the war, not the servicemen who fought it. Then I asked, how come all those protesters were spitting on the veterans when they returned home? Mary Reynolds Powell of Cleveland, who was a nurse in an Army hospital in Vietnam, said the organizers missed a priceless opportunity to heal some of the pain caused by that war to society, and most especially to the soldiers. Past presidents and military leaders guiding the war did more than Fonda to harm these guys, Powell said. But Jane Fonda's face is the one they most associate with betrayal, and I think the coordinators at Kent State probably have no idea of the pain that these guys carry. As for Fonda's appearance here, let her talk, Tiedemann said. That shouldn't be surprising. That's one of the greatest things about America, that we can express our opinions no matter how many disagree with them. Hear, hear, John Tidyman. I may not agree with what you are saying, but I will defend your right to say it to the death. That's another thing that makes America a great place. We can all come together and discuss our views on different subjects. You know what John Tidyman said? Here are a few comments other veterans in the area are making. Jane Fonda encouraged the continued killing of our soldiers so she can never get the forgiveness of those who lost a loved one in Vietnam. Ray Sakos, a Vietnam Army veteran of Pepper Pike, said that. Another Vietnam veteran, Dusty Trimmer of Aurora, said, I can't for the life of me think of what she can contribute now. Ray Covrette, a Marine veteran from Fairview Park, said, I know she apologized for the photo, which is fine, but the damage is already done. This is what Ron Schackenwald, an Army Vietnam veteran of North Ridgeville, said. Fonda's appearance is not beneficial in the long run for the community or the country. There you have it, the story of Jane Fonda's upcoming visit to Kent State University to help commemorate the 50th anniversary of the death of 4 students killed in an anti-war demonstration. As you can see, Jane Fonda has a lot of detractors, and she also has some supporters. That's the way it is in America. We listen to all sides. If you live in or anywhere around the Kent, Ohio area, you might want to drop by this event on May the 3rd, either to support Jane Fonda or maybe give her a piece of your mind. But please be nice if you do that. Don't be nasty about it. I read once she was at a book signing and a Vietnam veteran went up and spit some beech nut juice on her. I'm no fan of Jane Fonda, but I don't think we should be doing things like that. So if you are not a fan of Jane Fonda, but you want to say something to her, please be nice. I believe personally she is a nice person. There's a story on this podcast about her and her then-husband Ted Turner going to a restaurant out in Montana. And she was very nice out there, even though the local press said bad things about her. I think personally she's a nice person, but I may not agree with her political views. That's my opinion, and I'm sticking to it. This is Mac Payne closing out episode 1685 of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. You are cordially invited to come back again soon and often to listen to more of these stories coming your way on this podcast, the Vietnam Veteran News.
How about that? Ain't that a mess?